I'm going to follow the same format as the great Manny Style. You've all seen his bio. You all have gotten the email. You can read it yourself. But I've known Ron for a few years, and I will describe him as an intellect with a sense of humor, and a philosopher with a love of wisdom, and an instrument of practical imagination. I really believe you're going to enjoy this presentation. Feel free to laugh at some of his sarcastic jokes, even though they don't come across as being obvious. Again, with the sense of wisdom and knowledge comes that ability to have a tremendous sense of humor. So I'm grateful to know Ron. I'm grateful for the opportunity to introduce him. Thank you, Terry. And thanks, Ron, for being with us. The stage is yours.
Well, thank you, Scott. What a great and kind introduction. I'm sorry, I was just updating my website to include those words.
Oh, okay.
But thank you.
My pleasure.
So it is an absolute pleasure to be with you. I am coming to you electronically from my Intergalactic World headquarters in Golden Valley, Minnesota. And it's a pleasure to get an opportunity once again to present to optimists. And let me tell you why I say that. In 1970, I was a junior in high school, and I entered the Optimist Oratory competition. And I'm proud to say I took first place at my first stop, the club level. And then at the district level, I'm less proud to say I took third place. So I've spent the last 50 years trying to make up for that. So I appreciate the opportunity to once again try and do better than third place. So I'm happy to be with you. I was telling a friend of mine that I was going to be talking about positive attitude and avoiding complacency to optimists. And he said, boy, it takes a certain amount of courage to talk about positive attitude with optimists. And I hadn't really thought about that it needed courage. I thought, well, that's a welcoming audience. What I want to try and do today is kind of go behind that, because I think for most of us, the willingness to have a positive attitude or the clear benefits of it are fairly obvious. But I want to break it down a little bit and explain at least the way I look at a positive attitude and what that means. So I'm going to share my screen at this point. If you're on the phone, you're going to miss out on all the pretty pictures. I apologize for that. But I will say that at the end of my presentation, if you want a PDF of my presentation plus notes, I'll show you my email at the end, and you can always get it from Terry or Scott. Just let me know, and I'm happy to share this with anybody who wants it. So let me launch the PowerPoint, and we're off. So I want to start by just telling you a little bit about myself. I'm a consultant, but please don't hold that against me. I focus on the human elements that lead to our success and, in some cases, failure. So if you are predominantly working with robots, I got nothing for you. But if you're using humans or are human, then I might have some ideas that you can use. Now, all of us as humans, the things that make us up can make us operate at our best and at our worst. I can sometimes do that 2 or 3 times in an hour. And there's some really interesting reasons that we do that all of us share in common. And I'm going to talk about some of that today. But I'm sort of fascinated with the neuroscience of what we're finding out every day about how the human brain works and how it sometimes absolutely makes the difference for us and sometimes gets in our way. But I will just sum that up by saying that, quoting someone, I do a lot of work in the construction industry around the human elements of safety and how people can make decisions to be safer. And I was talking to a supervisor for a large construction firm, and he was talking about the challenges that he has are not so much the work, but the people. And he put it this way. He said, concrete's easy, people are hard. And that's a challenge for all of us, not only for ourselves, but for all of those around us. I've also recently written a book which has It's absolutely a satire about the consulting industry, taken from my years of experience. It's 80 pages of pure excitement. There's almost nothing in there that can be used in a real fashion, but it offers a break from the world, and you can get it anywhere great books are sold, as long as it's Amazon. So I want to talk about two topics today: positive attitude and avoiding complacency. And I'm going to hopefully explain how these two are related. I want to tell you a little bit about positive attitude and how I look at it, and then the dangers of complacency, which exist for all of us at all times. And it's kind of wired into us as humans. So I want to start with a little bit of philosophy, just to explain how I sort of look at the world. I believe that to be good at anything, you need the right mindset, you need the right skill set, and then you need the right tool set. And of these, I believe mindset's the most important. I think we've all known people who have all the skills and tools in the world, but they still don't perform the way they could. And my belief is that if you have the right mindset, you can do better with any skills and tools that you're given or that you can acquire. I want to give you an example of what I'm talking about here. So imagine a situation where you have a salesperson, and the salesperson is not really performing up to skill. Now, typically what we do is, well, let's get him a better laptop, and we'll get him all kinds of cool sales presentation software. We'll get him all the tools that he needs. And for whatever reason, he's still not performing. So then we typically send them to training. We'll give him some skill training, and we'll teach this guy to be a great salesperson. And then he still doesn't manage to do it. And I believe that more often than not, the reason is that he doesn't have the correct mindset for selling, or the correct set of mindsets. I'll give you a quick safety example. You have a piece of machinery, and someone manages to put their hand in it and get their fingertip cut off. So the first thing we do is we fix the tool. We put a guard on it, so there's no way you can stick your hand in there. And then somebody figures out how to stick their hand in there by going around the guard. So they cut another finger gets cut. And then we say, well, we got to send them to training. We got to train them. And possibly not only them, we have to train everybody in how to operate the machine safely. And yet still somebody will get hurt operating that. And again, it's because they didn't have the mindset that said, my job is to operate this piece of equipment safely. And if you don't have that mindset, people will always find ways to do the wrong thing or step around the guard. So typically, there's 6 reasons that people don't perform as well as they could. First of all, they don't know what to do. Secondly, they don't know how to do it. Thirdly, they don't have the tools to do it. Fourth is they don't want to do it. The fifth is they think they are doing it. And finally, they don't think they have to. And the thing about these 6 performance issues is 4 out of the 6 are mindset issues. So don't know how? Yep, that's a training issue. Don't have the tools? That's a tool set issue. The other 4 are mindset issues. And typically, and I spent a lot of years in the training business, we believe that training was the answer to everything, but it's only 1 out of the 6 performance issues. So unless you really look at the performance and really try and estimate which one of these or multiple ones is at hand here, you may waste some training dollars. Another way to put that is you're waiting for your cat to bark. So first step is, why aren't they performing? And I think one of the most dangerous ones is they think they are doing it. And so that's a whole different addressing. And most of these are mindset issues. Now, there's a reason that we don't address mindsets, that we hope beyond hope that the tools and training will do the trick. It's because mindsets are difficult. You can't really order people to change their mindset. You can influence it. And for all of us, we have a choice of our mindsets. And I'm going to talk about consciously choosing your mindset as we move forward. So why is this important? Because mindsets drive behavior. We sometimes try and change behavior, but the better way is to change the mindset, and that will drive the behavior that we're looking for in ourselves or in others. So, positive attitude. I said before that, this is something, I don't think you get a lot of argument about this. Most people will not say, no, positive attitude, that's ridiculous. Why would we ever want that? But I want to go behind that a little bit, because I think one of the challenges is, we've all probably said to ourselves or others, hey, let's have a positive attitude. But there's some things that I believe are behind that can help us more readily adopt that, and more importantly, maintain it, especially during tough times, much like we've just come through. So I think there's two key mindsets that are part of having a positive attitude. The first one is realistic optimism. And the way I define that is that it's a conscious choice to recognize the negatives, but find the positives in any given situation. So it's not just being, constantly for no apparent reason. And that's why I think real positive outlook on the future and striving to do whatever you can to make your situation better. Now, I think it's important to balance that with realism. So otherwise we kind of can fall into wishful thinking, or what people call rose-colored glasses, that we just only see the good. I think you have to balance it. And I want to share with you the best definition I've ever seen of realistic optimism. It's faith in my long-term success, but brutal honesty about the short-term realities. So I'm not kidding myself, but I have that faith in long-term success. And realistic optimism are well documented by science. People who have realistic optimism in their lives tend to live longer. They have better psychological and physical well-being. Interestingly enough, they have a stronger immune system, which is kind of important during this time of pandemic. They tend to have less stress in their lives, and stress is a major contributor to physical and emotional and psychological poor health. There's a lower risk of cardiovascular disease and depression with people who are realistically optimistic. They tend to perform better in their jobs and in their lives, and they have better coping skills. So there's solid benefits that science has proven with the realistic optimism. But it can be difficult to maintain. Let's not kid ourselves. It can be easy to slide into pessimism and negativity. Happens to all of us. And that's where the second mindset comes in to support that first one. And that is resilience. The ability to recover quickly from difficulties. It's a certain mental and emotional toughness, although I hesitate to use the word toughness because it's not about, I'm tough no matter what. It's having the strength to recover from difficulties that are going to happen to all of us. When you're resilient, you can face stressors and challenges. You can't eliminate them usually, but you can face them and figure out, what's my next step? What can I do? Resilience allows you to learn from mistakes and not just make a mistake or have something bad happen and spiral downwards. But you can learn from them and not avoid admitting them. Because if you don't have resilience, sometimes we just don't want to admit that we were wrong or we looked bad. And that's kind of hardwired into us too, to not admit those things. But resilience allows you to say, hey, I made a mistake. I'm going to learn from it. And hopefully I'm going to share my learning with others. Because one of the great things about humans is we are one of the few animals that can learn from the experiences of others. And sometimes that's a good learning, and sometimes it's not so good. I had an experience by the way, I should just ask if any of you know Barney Hedstrom. There's no reason you should. I went to junior high with him. But Barney never spoke in class. ever. He never raised his hand. He never said anything. And then one day, the teacher asked a question, and Barney raised his hand, and the teacher was shocked. We were all shocked. And Barney confidently gave an answer that was completely wrong. And the teacher said to him, Barney, maybe it's better if you don't raise your hand. Now, Barney learned a lesson that day, but more importantly, so did I. And so did everybody in the class, that, oh man, we are never going to raise our hands. So for the rest of the year, the teacher had to pull teeth to get anybody. And so what ended up happening is we all got voluntold. We got called on because nobody ever wanted to share because of what had happened to Barney. So when you're resilient, which Barney may have been, I'm not sure, you can look at that and say, well, I raised my hand. I confidently said something that was wrong. Now I'm going to learn from that and admit that there was a mistake, but I learned from it and go forward. And if I can, I'm going to share that learning as opposed to the other one, which is I'm going to hide and never do that again. Resilience allows you to bounce back from setbacks. We're all going to have setbacks. Some are big, some are small. But if you're resilient, again, you don't avoid them. You bounce back from them and bounce back and recover more quickly. And the connection is when you're resilient, it helps you retain your realistic optimism. So it goes hand in hand with that. The resilience leads to realistic optimism. Realistic optimism builds resilience. So those two things really work together to help us with that positive attitude. So there's been a lot of studies of people who are incredibly resilient, and I just want to share with you what those things have found. There's some strategies that resilient people use that I think I certainly try and follow and we can all learn from. So the first one is they get that, let's call it stuff happens. They understand that. They accept that stuff happens. They never spend a lot of time going, oh, why me? Or why did this happen? Or as if, it's kind of that victim mentality. They don't take the victim role. They say, hey, things happen, and let's move on to how to deal with it. Next thing they do is they choose very, very carefully and consciously where they focus their attention. Our focus often determines our reality. And what resilient people do is they realistically appraise situations. Again, the word realistically. They look at all sides of it, and then they focus on those things they can change, except the things that they can't. And we've all heard that saying before. But they really focus on, what can I do about this? You never hear resilient people say, I had no choice, because we always have a choice. Now, sometimes the choice is between something bad and something really bad, but we always have a choice. And they focus, where can I make the most difference and move this forward? Next one. They always ask, is what I'm thinking or doing helping me or harming me? Another way to say that is, are my choices leading me where I want to go or taking me farther away from what I want to go? So they're always asking that. And again, they don't diminish the negatives, but they've also worked out a way, a method, a habit of turning their attention, turning it into a positive. In psychology, they have a very nice way of saying this. They call it benefit finding. In the military, they frame it a little differently. They call it hunting the good stuff. Hunting the good stuff. And I really like that phrase, because that's something I like to try and do every day is I'm going to hunt the good stuff. I'm not going to wallow around in the bad stuff. So when they ask themselves this question, they're taking back control. They're putting themselves back in the driver's seat of their decision making. So they're not just operating out of habit or reacting. They're really responding and saying, what choices can I make to move myself where I want to go? And finally, they ask for help and they help others. Resilient people are not afraid to put their hand up and say, I need help with this. They have to be, you have to choose to be vulnerable in that case to say, hey, it turns out, I'm not a super person. We all need help occasionally. And, one of the greatest pieces of advice I ever got, because there have been times in my life where I've been hesitant to ask for help because I didn't want to do weak. And I had a mindset that said, well, I need to take care of this. But I got two pieces of advice. One was a saying, and that is, I have to do it myself and I can't do it alone. I have to do it myself, but I can't do it alone. So I have to make the conscious effort, but I need help to do it. We all need other people and each other. And the other piece of advice was, when you ask for help, you're giving other people an opportunity to be of service and to be of help. And that's a wonderful gift because we all like doing that. And so, but the other side of that is resilient people are willing to reach out and help other people. They are willing to share what they've done. And it's not necessarily advice. It might just be the story. Here was what happened to me, and here's the story. So, and that connection that they always try and make with people, and that caring creates more resilience. It enhances resilience. When you choose to connect with other people, whether you or they are under stress, you can create resilience and help them create resilience too. So they get that stuff happens. They choose carefully where they focus their attention. They ask always, is what I'm thinking or doing helping me or harming me, moving me closer or farther away from what I want in life? And they ask for help and help others. So that's kind of the positive attitude that I look at. Again, it's realistic optimism and resilience are the two pieces of that. And now I want to switch gears and talk about something that can really get in the way of that. And that is our old friend complacency. And again, I'm confident that you're all human, and so am I. And as a result, this is one of the biggest hazards we face. And by the way, the more successful you are at anything, the bigger the hazard of complacency. It's an interesting irony that complacency can really rear its head when we're successful. And I'll talk a little bit about why that's true. Now, I think complacency has been a hazard, but I think it's especially true now as we're, coming through the COVID. The epidemic really created some conditions that can foster complacency. I mean, normalcy, whatever that is, was disrupted, enormous change, an uncertainty. And I think for many of us, it was easy to just hunker down and wait for things to get back to normal. And that, I think, is a real strong drive a lot of times. I personally don't believe things ever get back to normal. And I don't think they will, because I'm not sure they were normal before. But really, what we're talking about is, I want things to be what I got used to. I want things to go back so I'm in my comfort zone. That's what we're really working. And that's a form of complacency. So let me give you the textbook definition of this. Complacency is self-satisfaction, especially when accompanied by unawareness of actual dangers or deficiencies. And in short, we stop paying attention. And I want to really draw your attention to that. Self-satisfaction is not necessarily a bad thing. We can be satisfied with ourselves, but when it's accompanied by unawareness of actual dangers or deficiencies, and they're always those things, because the world is changing around us all the time. We never get to be static. You're never really done with moving forward in your life, hopefully. And so it's when we sort of get comfortable that complacency can really raise its ugly head. So I want to share with you 4 sort of human factors that can make us susceptible to complacency. And these are things that are hardwired into all of us. We have these sort of lurking in our brains. So the first one is called systematic desensitization. That's a really fancy way of saying that when we hear something or see something or do something over and over and over again, we tend to get desensitized to it. and we stop paying attention to it. So, for example, if you hear the same message all the time, so you have a leader in your organization who always says the same thing all the time. Go out there and make a difference every time. Make a difference. Make a difference. Make it. At some point, your brain says, "We got this." And the human brain, if any of you are familiar with Daniel Kahneman's work, Fast Brain, Slow Brain, one of the things he talks about is that the brain is really these two parts. And the slow brain is really the higher level of the brain, and it takes a lot of energy to run that. The fast brain is sort of habit, autopilot, automatic responses, takes care of a lot of the human things. So you don't have to consciously think about breathe in, breathe out, heart keep beating, pancreas, do whatever you do. We don't have to think about that. That's just operating. The slow brain operates much less energy, needs much less energy. So when we get systematically desensitized to something, it sort of moves into the slow brain. The brain says, we got this. We'll let the slow brain handle it. We don't need to think about it that much anymore. And we just respond to it. Another, I guess, more dramatic example, and this is another safety example, that the first time, here's the example. A friend of mine, her husband was a firefighter, and he was a captain. He had been firefighter for 20 plus years. He rose to captain in the San Jose Fire Department. And now you can only imagine over 20 years how many ladders this man had climbed. But I guarantee you, the first time he climbed up an aerial ladder, he was very conscious of what he was doing. He took his time. He went up very slowly. He followed all the rules. He knew what he was doing. But over time, as a human, he probably thought about it less. It became the habit. He knew what he was doing. Up the ladder he goes. Fast forward to 20 plus years, he set a ladder up on his garage. And as he was climbing up to the top of this 6-foot ladder, he fell off, hit his head, and died of a traumatic brain injury in the driveway. Now, he knew how to climb a ladder, but for whatever reason, on that day, he didn't do it in the safest way possible. That's a very dramatic example of systematic desensitization. We just simply, if you don't pay attention, it just happens to all of us. Now, if you're someone who gives messages to people, the safety tip here is change your method. Don't change the message, but change the method. Use a couple different words, shake it up, show a video, tell a story. If you keep saying the same thing over and over, people just stop. They just stop really leaning into it. So that's the tip on this one. Second factor is normalization of deviance, and that is not as fun as it sounds. Normalization of deviance is a long-term phenomenon in which we repeatedly get away with a deviation from established success standards until it's no longer seen as a deviation. It becomes the new implied standard. So if you are doing something and you know what works for you, so let's say you have a success pattern in your business. You know the success pattern. You know if you do these things, you'll be successful. And then one day, and I'll use a sales example. Let's say you know that if you make 10 contacts a week, that leads to significant sales down the road. But you got to do those 10 contacts. So you do those and you get success. Everything's going great. And then one week, for whatever reason, you only do 8. But you still get sales. So, okay, maybe I can get by with 8. And then it becomes 7. And then maybe 6, and then maybe 5. And things are still going around good, but all of a sudden one day things stop working. And it's because you slowly got away and you normalized the deviance. And one of the things that happens over and over again with humans is when we don't get significant consequences for slipping away and not being conscious of here's what I do well and I want to stay with it, it's easy to slide into this one, and that leads to complacency. And that can lead to some very significant problems. when we repeat success when we have those deviances, there's a belief that says that established standards, when we can do that and we get success, then that somehow implies future success. And if you remember the Challenger disaster, one of the mindsets that in the investigation after that, you remember the O-rings, they launched in colder weather than were their standards. And what they found in the investigation was that they had a standard of temperature that, below this, we won't launch because, the O-rings aren't tested for that. And then they launched a couple degrees below that and it worked out fine. And so they started to slip that down until the day of the Challenger explosion. It was significantly below the standard and the O-rings gave way. And one of the things that the investigators identified was a mindset at NASA that said, if it hasn't happened, it can't happen. That was their mindset. If it hasn't happened, because we think of everything, then it can happen. And it was interesting to talk to the Apollo 13 astronauts. I've heard them speak. And one of the things they said was, we practiced everything we could think of. But then when they had their disaster, they said, yeah, we hadn't thought of that. But what they had trained to is to solve problems. So they were able to bring it home. But with Challenger, they couldn't. So with normalization of deviance, everything's fine until it isn't. And if we don't pay attention to that, that's complacency can lead to a sudden loss. And all of a sudden we're sitting there going, I don't know what happened. I was super successful a month ago and now nothing. And as humans, we probably will first address blame to the clients in the market and everything. He, she, they, and them are all at fault. But really, we let our mindset slip away from this. Okay, third one, inattentional blindness. And this is really how it's kind of the human nature to see what we expect to see and to see what we're going to look for. And we often miss the rest of what's going on. So our brains selectively attend to some information while ignoring other things. So for example, let's say, all of you remember the days when you may have driven to an office. You pull in, you park your car, and you get out and you walk into the office, and you do that 5 days a week. And, your brain really isn't paying attention to every step you take. And one day somebody put out a mat in front of the door and you trip over it because you didn't expect to see that there because it's never been there before. It's the same reason. Another safety example is that when you take a safety driving, you're trained to always walk around your vehicle before you start it up, because when you pull into a blindness says, I don't see anything in front of me or behind me, and there wasn't before, so I'm probably okay to just gun it. We always want to walk around and take a look. So Ronald Reagan's phrase, trust but verify, comes in with this. The other thing about inattentional blindness is if we're really focused on one thing, we don't pay attention to the other things around us. Pilots call this situational awareness. It's knowing everything that's going on. So if you're in a meeting, or on a Zoom call, and you're paying attention to one part of it, you might miss other things. May not be important, but it could be. One of the things that is part of inattentional blindness is we have expectations regarding what is supposed to happen or what we're supposed to see. And that, again, can result in us less likely to see something out of the ordinary or unexpected. And it causes us to miss opportunities in many cases because we hear what we expect to hear. And so overcoming this really takes focus. But again, this is another form of factor of complacency. And finally, and this one's going to seem a little bit out of connection with what I've talked about up to this point, but optimism bias. And we're not talking here about being optimistic and being realistically optimistic and being part of the optimist group. What we're talking about here is a function of our brain in which humans overestimate the likelihood of something positive happening and underestimate the likelihood of something negative happening to themselves. So this is something that's operating in our brain, and where it comes up is it's assessing risk or assessing what's about to happen. It's about risk assessment really more than anything. By the way, the fancy science name is mild positive illusion, and the rest of us call it rose-colored glasses. But we overestimate that good things will happen to us, and we underestimate that negative things will, which is why sometimes people are so shocked and appalled and victimized when bad things happen, because of the optimism bias. So here's a little mind activity for you. So if I told you that 1 hour after this presentation, one person on this call today is going to have a massive heart attack, most of us will start looking at the other pictures to see who we think it's going to be. And by the way, stop staring at my picture. On the other hand, if I told you that, hey, Saturday night, the Powerball drawing, someone on this call is going to win the Powerball, we would all start in our minds spending the money. That's an example of the optimism bias. We all think we're going to win. And by the way, that's how lotteries work. If you didn't have an optimism bias, I have a friend who's a mathematician, and he told me once that the odds of winning the Powerball are the same whether you buy a ticket or not. And I thought that, well, that's the best explanation I've ever heard of a lottery. It's really, he said, it's basically a tax on people who don't understand probability. And so these four things are hardwired into all of us. And that's why it's so easy to become complacent and why we really have to pay attention to it. But there's some other factors that can also contribute to complacency. Fatigue, stress, spending too much time and enjoying our comfort zone and being on autopilot. All these things can kind of lead into that. And by the way, stress and fatigue have been a huge issue during the pandemic. There's a second epidemic of stress in people, and I watched Dr. Terry Wu. Some of you may know him. He's a neuroscientist. Has some fabulous YouTube videos. If you get a chance or have heard him speak, he's fabulous on the science of how our brain does this. And he did one on stress reduction and the dangers of stress and fatigue. The physical and emotional dangers are terrifying. The things that can happen if we're under stress, especially chronic stress. And I think a lot of us, whether we know it or not, have been under chronic stress. And it's an important thing to pay attention to, but it also can lead to complacency. And we also, when you're stressed, fatigued, you just lose energy and motivation. And that's a form of complacency. And I'll talk more about the comfort zone and autopilot in a bit. So how do you know if you're being complacent? So I want to give you a few warning signs, things that in yourself and in others you can look for. Being satisfied with status quo. I'm just satisfied with the way things are right now. I want it to stay this way forever. Going with the flow, doing what everyone else is doing, doing things strictly out of habit. Habits are a wonderful thing. They allow us to do lots of things without using that high energy top brain. But we can also fall into habits that we don't really pay attention to, and they can become, for lack of a better word, habitual. And we do them without even thinking about them. And also, satisfied with status quo means we're staying in our comfort zone. And the comfort zone's a wonderful place. It's a happy place. We're comfortable. The thing about the comfort zone is we know everything that's in there. I mean, everything. We got it. This is our area. And when you stay there, you can become complacent. Second one is boredom or inability to focus. And I know a lot of people, including myself, I haven't necessarily been bored during the pandemic, but I've found myself with an inability to focus sometimes. And this is, to me, it's an indicator that, all right, I'm getting a little complacent here. I got to do something about that. It can be a chore to do your work day after day after day. It just kind of all seems the same and nothing changes. And if you don't feel challenged or aren't challenging yourself, that's a warning sign of complacency. No desire to learn or stay proficient. If you feel that you know everything you need to know and you're set for life, that's a form of complacency. And if you don't continue to learn and grow and improve, you fall behind. You don't stay static. Albert Einstein put it this way. He said, once you stop learning, you start dying. And I think this is an important part of complacency. If you're not learning anything new, you may be complacent. And finally, acceptance of lower standards. This kind of connects back to that normalization of deviance, but you find yourself cutting corners or saying that's good enough, or, just saying, I personally have an amazing ability to rationalize anything. And as humans, if you have a healthy brain, you can't do anything unless your brain rationalizes it. You have to make it make sense for you. And all of us are very skilled at that usually. But if you accept lower standards than you're used to or that you know are important in your life, lower standards as a human, lower standards as a father, as a mother, as a friend, as in business, if you start to accept lower standards, that's a form of complacency. And especially when you know what makes you successful. So how do we avoid this terrible thing of complacency? Well, first, two safety tips. Number one, avoiding complacency, it's not easy. It's just important. Okay, so it's not easy. I don't want to set this up as do these three things, wave your magic wand, jump up 3 times, circle, run outside, come back in. You'll never be complacent again. No, doesn't work that way. But the other thing is complacency is always a choice. The question is, are you making an unconscious choice, a subconscious choice, or a conscious choice? And most complacency is operating at the unconscious level until we start to pay attention. Remember that unawareness of hazards. So we have to pay attention and make the choice. And if you choose, after looking at all the data and you analyze everything and you say, nope, I'm going to choose to be complacent, God bless. I mean, that's your choice. But I'm going to advocate strongly that you may want to choose another path. So what can you do to avoid complacency? As I said, make conscious choices. Pay attention. One of the things about mindset is that most of us don't think about what we think about. We think about what we do. We think about how we feel. We think about how others feel about us, but we don't think about what we think about. And it's that little voice in our head, that thing that's going almost all the time. We may not be paying as much attention. So, I would say, pay attention to that. What is your mindset? What's your self-talk? What's going on right here? Especially if you're not getting the results you want. So make conscious choices. Choose to avoid complacency. Choose to be realistically optimistic. Choose to be resilient. Choose to focus your attention on the positives. Hunt the good stuff. That's a conscious choice. Pay attention to those complacency factors that I mentioned: systematic desensitization, normalization of deviance, inattentional blindness, and optimism bias. Pay attention to those. Are they showing up for you? Also, fatigue, stress, comfort zone, autopilot. Just pay attention to what's going on for me right now, and am I at risk of complacency? And then you can take steps to avoid it. If you feel any of those things are operating, you can make a choice to move away from that. And finally, know what makes you successful. And I want to share with you a little model about what this looks like. And so here it is. And for those of you who can't see it, it's basically a grid. It's a quadrant. And I think there's a rule in presentations that you must show a quadrant model. I think that's federal law. I'm not sure, but here's mine. I'm now compliant. So the vertical axis is consciousness. The higher boxes is you're more conscious, lower boxes less conscious. And then the horizontal axis is competency. Farther to the right, you're more competent. To the left, less competent. So there's 4 areas in this. And by the way, this is called cleverly the competency model. So here's the first one. Upper left, high conscious, high competency. It's called the conscious competent. And this, in short, what this really means is that you know what you're good at, and you're conscious of it. You know you're good, you know why you're good, and most importantly, you know what you can do to change that. So if you stop being good, you can fix it. And most possibly importantly is if you're consciously competent, you can teach others because you know your success pattern. Okay, so moving over then, still high conscious, but less competence is the conscious incompetent. And this is, I'm not doing well, but I know why. Back over to the right is the unconscious competent. And this is someone who's really good, but they have no idea why. They have no idea how they do it. And if you ask them and say, hey, how do you do that? They usually say, I don't know, or just watch me. This is the difference between someone who's got a great golf swing and someone who can teach me how to have a great golf swing. I have friends who are great, tremendous golfers. And if I ask them how they do it, they just say, well, just watch me. So that's an unconscious competent. And finally, the unconscious incompetent, who, or known as left field without a glove. They don't know what they don't know. They're just wandering around. So when I ask a group where they think the best place is, it's always unanimous. Conscious competence, best place to be. You know, that's the one you should choose. And I totally agree with that. They all agree that the worst place to be is unconscious incompetent. And then there's usually the group is a little split on what's the second best place to be. Many people say unconscious competent, at least you're competent. And the fact that you don't know why is less important. The important thing is to be competent. And I challenge that. I think the second best place to be is conscious incompetent. Because if I know that I don't know, I can do something about that. I can learn, I can get better and move towards conscious competency. If I'm an unconscious competent, not only can't I fix things, if things start to go wrong, I have no idea what I was doing before, so I can't fix it, and they can't teach anybody how to do it. So I would argue for conscious incompetent. If you have to be somewhere, go with consciousness first and foremost. So let's talk about taking action. And I think one of the things that is always true for me, and it may always be true for you as well, but when you are part of a presentation like this or any learning experience, the real difference between entertainment and killing an hour and actually making a change is the action step. And I think so often we're probably all guilty of this. I'll watch a presentation, I'll think, boy, that was really good, but then I don't do anything with what I learned. So I want to really advocate and give you a few ideas on things you can do that are some action steps that you can do right away. So the first one is examine your habits. You know, what are those habitual things? And this takes some paying attention, but those things you do all the time. In the old days where you drove more, maybe you're getting back to driving again. What I find really interesting is all my driving habits, I've kind of forgotten them because I haven't been driving as much. And so when I go out, I have to be much more conscious of where's my exit or where am I turning, or whereas before I just kind of knew. And I don't know if this has happened to any of you, that experience where you're driving along, maybe you're going to work or you're going someplace you go all the time, and you get there and you can't really remember how you did it. And you try and think back over your route and how fast was I going and all that, you can't remember. And the breaking of glass and honking of horns and screeching of brakes behind you really didn't get your attention. Or perhaps you've looked in the rearview mirror at a stop sign and thought, did I stop for that? We get into these habits, and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad. But I would advocate that just examine them. The ones that are working for you, great, keep them. The other ones that aren't working as well, or that you don't feel are moving you forward, maybe it's time for some new habits. And it's always good to sort of kind of create a new habit because it stimulates the brain and neural pathways, and whatever it is, minor or major, it can help. But here's a safety tip. It takes 21 days, more or less, to create a new habit. And it's important to know that's 21 days straight. That's not total. So if on day 3 you slide away and skip a couple days, the numbers go back to 0 and you start your 21-day run again. But if you stay with it, after 21 days, you will have created new neural pathways in the brain that make the new habit the default behavior. And it will just start to become second nature. And anyone who's learned anything new, from playing the guitar to doing something every day, setting up disciplines to do that, will know this is true. And all of a sudden, you look at the calendar, you're weeks or months down the road, and you don't think about it anymore. It's just become part of what you do and who you are. So in connection with that, second thing I would advocate is I would do, you can do this as soon as this call is done or whenever you want, but don't wait too long, is try something that you've never done before. Or try something, this is a little extra challenge, try something that you know you won't like, be it food or an activity or whatever else. You know going in, or you're making up that you won't like it, just try it. And because it will take you out of your comfort zone. And you may, after trying it, going, yep, I was right, I don't like that. Great, the comfort zone's there waiting for you. You can just race right back and get in your comfort zone. But anytime you get outside your comfort zone, that's where learning lives. I said before, you know everything there is to know about your comfort zone. There is no surprises inside the comfort zone. And you cannot learn in the comfort zone because you already know everything. You have to get outside. And I'm not advocating going 5 miles outside your comfort zone, just a little step. If you're used to doing something a certain way, do it another way. It not only helps you learn, helps avoid complacency, but sometimes it can provide you a different perspective. I'll give you an example. One day, I don't remember why, but I was on my hands and knees in my living room doing something. And I looked up and my dog walked over and was staring at me, and his face was at exactly the same level as my face. And I started looking around the room and I thought, well, this is how my dog sees the house. So I spent the next couple hours going around the house on my hands and knees, much to the chagrin of others, just to see what it looked like. And I learned 2 things. Because I did the same thing with my wife, who's was significantly shorter than I am, and I found where I could hide the M&Ms up on top of the refrigerator because she could never see them. So I learned, but it caused me to walk around on my hands and knees. But just get outside your comfort zone, try something different. And in connection with that, look for opportunities to learn. And it can be big things or little things. It can be reading books. And I see most of you have wonderful bookcases behind you. Hopefully they're not showcases, that you read those books, but reading books, I love to listen to podcasts when I'm out walking. And sometimes I find them, it's something I'm interested in. Some things I'll listen to something that I have no interest in at all and hope that there's something there for me. Webinars, YouTube videos, especially TED Talks or presentations, all of these, and hopefully this presentation too, are opportunities to learn something. One of the things that I believe is that there's going to be 1 or 2 things in everything that I can use. And so in an hour presentation, there might be just 1 or 2 things, and it might be nothing to do with the content. It might be, gee, I like the way that person used slides, or they used an interesting phrase, or sometimes I'll look at something and it makes me want to look further into it. But I'm not looking for, this was an hour that was just power packed, partially because I can't, I have to go back and look at it again because I can't process that much. But I take handwritten notes when I'm listening to things, and then I go back afterwards and type those notes up. And partially it's so I have them, but the other part is it anchors my learning. So writing it and then typing it, it anchors it. And I'll take screenshots of the screen and I want to look back at things. But again, I'm just looking for 1 or 2 things that can help me learn stuff. And one of the things I did during the pandemic was I specifically tried at least once a week to watch or listen or read something that I didn't care anything about. And I saw some interesting things, but there was almost always one and sometimes many things in there that made me go, oh, well, now I guess I am kind of interested in that. Never really thought geology was that fascinating until I watched this video, and I got really sort of interested in it. Not so much that I'm going to change careers, but there's always something there if you have that curiosity and kind of look at life like, what can I learn here? By the way, it's part of resilience. Is you look at everything this is a learning opportunity. And a guy I used to work with used to say that you're either on the winning team or the learning team. Those are your two teams. There's no losing team if you take that approach. And so one or two things, small steps that you can do right now is my best advice I can give you. And if you get good at that, you can add one or two more. But I think a lot of times we get sideways because we look at too big of a step. New Year's resolutions are kind of a classic. Most of them don't last much past February. And there's a couple reasons for that. Most of the time, our resolutions are way too broad and way too big, and they need to be broken down into little steps. So rather than saying, this year I'm going to lose weight. Okay, well, that's too big, doesn't have a time saying, as opposed to saying, for the next 10 days, I'm going to not use creamer in my coffee. I'm going to reduce that sugar. That's a small step, and I can take that. And if that works, then I can add it to something else and keep going. So, and it can be as small as you want. Like if you say, well, I'm going to read more books. Okay, I'm going to read one chapter in a book every week, or I'm going to read just 10 pages every day. Whatever it is, just a small achievable step, and you get those little wins, and that helps propel us forward. So let me kind of bring this to a conclusion, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. You can type them in the chat, or we can chat real time. So first of all, pay attention to your mindset. Mindset matters. If I always do what I've always done, I'll always get what I've always got. And if I always think what I've always thought, I'll always do what I've always done. So it all starts with mindsets. How am I thinking about this? Am I being realistically optimistic? Am I being resilient? Am I choosing those things as I face the world? That to me is a positive attitude mindset. Second thing is mindsets are contagious. So you can catch a mindset from someone the same way you would catch a cold. And so you can catch pessimism and negativity, but you can also catch resiliency and realistic optimism. So a step that you can take right away is to minimize those carriers of negativity, those energy vampires in your life that just drain the energy right out of you and that always carry that negative. And also for yourself, choose to be a carrier of positive attitude. And I know that's preaching to the choir with optimists, but making that conscious choice, you will influence others by how you show up and by that attitude of optimism. And in the Lutheran faith, we call it quiet witnessing. You don't have to tell everybody all the time. Just show up that way, and people can feel that. And with any luck, they'll catch that. And you will be sharing optimism in a good contagion. And watch for those warning signs of complacency. If you see them, take action. Don't be complacent about avoiding complacency, because the more successful you are, the more likely it is. And as humans, it happens to all of us. So I like to share great wisdom that I've found along the way. So just in terms of action, I want to share these two. First of all, Winston Churchill said, I never worry about action, but only about inaction. So do something, I think is Winston's advice. And then from another noted person in history, Kinky Friedman, the country singer and author. And he said, if you're patient and wait long enough, something will usually happen. And it will usually be something you don't like. So don't wait, take action. And let me just finish my remarks with a quick story. So I'm a huge baseball fan. I love baseball, and I will watch it any chance I get. And it's been kind of difficult this year because one of the things I like to do is I have a little league park near my house, and in non-pandemic summers, out walking the dog will go down to the little league park and just watch a few innings of the game. So one day we were down there watching the game, and we see this little guy, and he was a tiny little tyke, but boy, he looked serious, and he was swinging the bat, and he had his helmet on, and he was doing his best Kirby Puckett swing and stance, and he looked really raring to go. And I said, "Hey, pal, what's the score?" And he said, "We're losing 26-0. And I said, "Well, you seem kind of chipper about that." He said, "Well, why not? We haven't even been up to bat yet." So now it's your turn. You're up to bat. Make a difference, stay positive, and keep complacency out of your life. I appreciate this opportunity. I hope I did better than my third place finish in 1970. I've been working hard at it. If you want this presentation or have any questions or comments, or just my email's up there. It's Ronn, R-O-N-N, at Ronn Lehmann, R-O-N-N-L-E-H-M-A-N-N, a lot of N's, .com. And my number's there too, 612-353-7800. Please contact me if you have questions or concerns or want to argue about anything. I love talking about this stuff, as I hope you can tell. So thank you very much. I will get out of the screen share here, and any questions that anyone has, I am all yours.
Well, Ron, I'll start just by thanking you very much for all your insight. And we remind others that if you have a question, it's really helpful if you can type it in the chat. If you go to reactions, you can raise your hand, and then we'll see, and we'll unmute you, or you have to unmute yourself to ask a question. So as we're going here, maybe is there someone who'd like to start off with a question? And I see I got Scott. Scott's helping me watch the chat here. So anyone, you can try to wave your hand, but we got several screens, so it's hard to watch for those.
Barney Hedstrom wants you to speak up.
Yeah.
Wherever he is.
It was a great presentation, Ron. Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks,
great
Scott.
reminder of stuff. So I'm glad that we recorded it, and we'll get it on the website very soon for those that want to see it, that are dialed in and on the phone. So
go ahead. Don't be bashful now. You guys can unmute yourself if we're not getting you, seeing your question. Unmute yourself.
I got a question, Terry.
Okay, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Ron. I just became a member of the club last week, thanks to Mike Erickson and Don Salverda, who worked with my dad about 100 years ago. But I enjoyed your talk, Ron, and you and I have got to meet, because from looking at your book and your website, you and I do very similar work. And I loved what you were doing, especially the stuff with mindset, because about half of my work is working with contractors to help them be safer by changing the way they relate. I don't do so much the inner work. You're braver than me, Ron. But my question, I do more like how to help the foreman get more compliance from their guys, how to help handle the guy who always comes late, that maybe the foreman who's rough around the edges. Some of it is culture change work, but I'm just curious, because I'm sure you've worked in a number of industries. I find the construction world can be a very challenging world, Ron. That's why we got to chat. Compared to other industries, how would you rate the construction world in terms of their openness to this relatively deep work you're doing, and what sort of results have you found in construction versus other industries?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Tom. I'm tempted to give the consultant's favorite answer. It depends. But my experience has not led that. And maybe I've been really lucky. I guess part of it is that I do cultural audits in companies where I'll go in and interview people just to get a sense of what the operating culture is, not the one that's written on the website or that the leaders say, but what's operating? What are the rules? And I guess the default is that companies that don't want to talk about this stuff are not going to pay me to do that. So when I get hired, they're already kind of leading into it. And but I have found that construction people are some of the most open to the kind of discussions about the human elements, because that's what they deal with. I mean, when foremen are the tip of the sword, and so often, and this is true for any frontline supervisor, we give them the position because they were really good at the job. So the best carpenter is now the supervisor or the foreman, and we don't really give them any training skills because now their job is not being a carpenter anymore, it's being a leader. And so it sounds like you help them with that and help them work on the people problems. I don't know how many frontline people I've had say to me, I had no idea how much the human stuff would take up my job. Between the paperwork and the humans, I'm a psychologist, I'm a priest, I'm a best friend, I'm a doctor. I mean, all these things coming up all the time. And I find them very open, especially in construction, in similar trades, to saying, hey, whatever you got, I'm willing to try it with people because whatever we're doing isn't working. And I spent a lot of time on that concept of, especially with safety, compliance is table stakes. I mean, you can't settle for less than compliance, but how do you move them to being committed? And so from compliance to safety commitment or quality commitment or anything else, the whole discussion of mindsets, I find them being pretty open to it. Much more so than some industries you would think would be.
That's good to hear, Ron. I think partly because I come in sometimes as the conflict resolution guy. I have a master's degree in conflict resolution. So I get called. One of my clients in Chicago had a foreman punched in the jaw by one of his workers. I don't want to take all the time here, but I think you and I probably have different clients, and I will definitely follow up. And I definitely would like your slide deck also.
Well, please do. I will definitely reach out to me and we'll connect. And I just want to give you this heads up though, because one of my operating mantras is steal shamelessly, share graciously. So, if you have a good idea, I'll always give you credit, but I may just snitch it. So, and I will offer anything I've got, please use it, especially when it comes to safety.
Yeah.
That's a passion of mine. And if we can keep people from getting hurt, I'm all for it.
Amen. Thank you, Ron, so much.
Oh, thank you, Tom. And I'll look forward to hearing from you.
All right, Terry, do you want to move on? And for some people that don't know, but Ron got an award and he's probably spent about 6 hours looking for that award, but has not been able to find it. He was going to show us his Optimism Award.
I couldn't find my 2 statues, and they've traveled from house to house for years, and I visualize them, and I know that later today they'll show up.
Yeah, exactly.
So I am optimistic about that, but they were, beautiful statues. The 3rd place was bigger than the 1st place, but
yeah. But I think Terry might have something for you to add to that collection when you find it.
I do, and I did go looking, Ron, on YouTube, but then I realized that award you got was probably on a vacuum tube, so I couldn't find it.
Yeah, I believe it was broadcast on the radio.
Yeah, probably on the radio.
Thanks, Terry, for pointing out how old I am. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, just it probably covers a couple of us in the room here today or on the call. But I do, and I want to thank you. You really have touched a lot of bases on the Optimist Creed. Forget the mistakes of the past and press on to the greater achievements of the future. You think only for the best, expect only the best are just 2 of the lines, and there's many other ones are there. I don't have a plaque with me today, but we will get you a plaque of the Optimist Creed that you can it's big, it's about 7 by 5 or something. 5 by 7.
I will not lose it.
You won't lose this one. And
thank you.
And please come back and listen to some of our other fine speakers because you'll have lots of questions for them. But it was great hearing you today and hearing your your safety, your ideas, your thoughts there as a ex-safety professional. I don't know if you're ever ex in that department, but you're there. And I know we've chatted a little bit about things you can do with employees and workers, and we want to make sure people are safe. And just a lot of this mindset is something we need to continue to work on, but it's a good way to keep optimistic. And again, I like some of your thoughts about not becoming complacent, because I think that's a big problem that happens in a lot of places. We think we have all the right answers, and we don't keep listening and keep learning and growing. It's an important thing.
And I think that's why a group like this is so important. This is really a continuous learning and improvement, and you lean into that sort of thing. And I think that's great. So I would just remind everybody, hunt the good stuff.
Yep, hunt the good stuff. Thank you very much. So with that, thank you much, Scott, for your introduction. And will be any other questions there? I don't see anybody, but thank you very much. We really appreciate it. It's wonderful.
Thank you all.
Yes,
Thank you.
Yes.
Great to be with you.
Good.